Hello, my name is Mike Barker. I'm a landscape architect at Shift Landscape Architecture based in Guelph. We've been working for about the last 6 weeks or so with the municipality on the Memorial Arena Park, the park that's going to go in place of Memorial Arena. So through this presentation, I'm going to take you through two concepts that we've developed, looking for your feedback. This is the sort of thing we'd normally do in person in an open house, but given the circumstances around COVID, we just can't do this. So you'll be able to watch the presentation here, and then on Have Your Say North Perth site, there's opportunity to provide comments and answer some questions that'll help us move things forward. So I'm going to move fairly quickly through the presentation. This is the outline. We'll look at two concepts, then we'll look at some form and materials that are shared between them, and then next steps. There's also a PDF document that has a little bit more detail than will be presented here in the presentation. And of course, you can watch this presentation through more than once, and you can stop and take a look at things a little bit closer. But just to keep this as efficient as possible, I will move fairly quickly. Okay, so here's our first concept, and we're looking down, of course, in plan view, so from above. I'm going to start over here at this front edge, and this is a space that we view almost like a front porch or a front entryway into the park. We envision that this could be a spot for community markets, small art fairs, those sorts of things that bring the community together, and that of course could spill over into the streets here or use the parking lot. So it really serves as that transition space from the broader park into this area. There's also an opportunity to create some interesting and unique seating in here that would allow for people to look out over John Bell baseball diamonds. So watch a ball game in the summer or attend a tournament. During those tournaments, this is a spot where families could gather between games and those sorts of things. As you move into the park along this pathway, you enter into the memorial space, which sits here. This is a fairly small area, self-contained, bordered on both sides by trees, and we have a bit of topography over here, a bit of landform to create that sort of contained environment. There's benches in here for seating, and I'm going to talk about this space in more detail in a few slides, but just to get you oriented and situated here, we have what we're referring to as an arena board sculpture. And from that point, you look out over this grass area to the center ice marker, and then beyond that is what we're referring to as our memorial trees, or a grove of memorial trees, so eight memorial trees. And this center ice marker, if we just step back here for a second, is located in the spot that center ice resides currently. The grass field that you see here is intended to be a play space, so a place to kick a ball or throw a ball in the summer months, but also a spot that the community could create an ice rink in the winter. We don't imagine that this is a refrigerated surface, but simply a space on the grass that could be flooded every year. We're, as I mentioned, from Guelph, and we do this in a lot of our parks, and it's quite successful. It brings the community together, which is, I think, an important aspect of this type of space. Down below here, you see what we're referring to as sensory play or natural play. And so we think there's an opportunity to bring something a little bit different to Listowel. I know just on the other side of the ball diamond, there's the what we'd refer to as maybe a standard or typical play structure. And so this is an opportunity to bring some play elements that allow for kids to use their imagination a little bit more and create their own play, as opposed to the more prescriptive type of play that a play structure gives us. Here you see a contemplative grove, and we suggest this in both concepts, as you'll see it later in the presentation. But this is a space with some benches underneath the shade of trees, so a space that's fairly serene and quiet, a place to read a book, gather with a friend, and have a coffee. Those types of things. And just before moving on, I'll just note that in this concept and in the other one as well, we're suggesting a fairly large area of meadow planting, so an area that is seeded with native meadow plants. And after the first couple of years, this becomes really a self-sustaining landscape. It needs to be cut down once every year. But other than that, it really is self-sustaining and brings an aesthetic quality as well. But it also has an ecological function in that it's going to attract beneficial insects, birds, butterflies. It also helps to deal with stormwater on site, as we'll get significant infiltration in these areas. So it has quality that enhances the aesthetic and the experience of the park, but also has beneficial ecological aspects to it as well. Okay, here's the concept in model form, a little study model that we put together, and I think this starts, hopefully it assists you in viewing the concept and understanding it a little bit more, given its three-dimensional nature. So one of the things that I didn't mention, but in the plan, but you see here, is this idea of the arena marker. So we'd like to mark the corners of the arena. In this concept, in this case, we're suggesting that these could be vertical markers, and they could be out of a variety of materials. They could be engraved. They could serve as a bit of an interpretive piece, a literal interpretive piece, as well as marking the corners. You see here our memorial space that looks out over, and I'm going to talk about that sculptural piece that I spoke of. But you see how there's this connection across the site, picking up center ice and then finding these memorial trees in the background. The idea of sensory play down here, and it's close to the parking lot, so if there are people that are coming to use that play equipment or that play area, there's parking close by. Then the contemplative grove that kind of looks out over, so you have this corner of the site that is given over to a passive, sort of serene type of condition. And here's a quick sketch. In both concepts, we've developed these sort of schematic sketches I think they illustrate the intent of the memorial features, but they're not overly prescriptive at this point. You can see here what we're suggesting is an abstraction of a hockey board. We're not suggesting that this is actual hockey board. I think this main part here could be concrete, beautifully sandblasted or acid washed concrete with the names engraved. This dasher board along the bottom here could become stainless steel. And then we envision that this top piece could be bronze, and I'll respond to or relate that to these skates at the bottom in a moment. But we also include these vertical pieces, which of course are sort of symbolic of the glass that the boards would typically hold. But for us, it starts to frame this view across the site to these memorial trees. And as I noted, we're suggesting that there's these bronze skates, 8 pairs, 7 smaller ones, and 1 large pair of skates. And of course, recalling the victims that were lost. And I think if you remember in plan, we had benches that sit over in behind this. So to be able to sit on those benches and reflect on that tragedy, I think this is quite a simple memorial, but could become quite powerful and impactful in the way that it's received. And here's a few images of what we envision for those memorial elements that I was speaking of. So this idea of flowering trees amongst more typical deciduous type trees, so that they really stand out, they're impactful, they take on a different quality, and they're special at the end of the day. Within that memorial space, if we imagine that the rest of the circulation system, the rest of the pathways are concrete, we could have a precast surface, either these types of unit pavers or larger slabs. And then over here you see this idea of the vertical element. If you recall, I spoke about marking the corners, so the opportunity to have these vertical almost totems within the landscape. Okay, that brings us to the second concept. This one, for the sake of time, I'm just going to focus mainly around this central area. And this really, if the other one set up a memorial sort of situation that we had our element and it took in the whole site, this one is much more centralized and sort of comes together as a central focal piece that the rest of the park sort of works around. Here you see the memorial garden, and within this space we're suggesting a sculptural element that we refer to as a hockey stick sculpture. So there'd be 8 hockey sticks coming out vertically of a garden space. And this space is enclosed by a berm, so a fairly simple small earthwork, but that embraces that area. And then across the other side, this is center ice here, so reflected on the other side is an area that we're referring to as the Survivors Grove. And it's important, we think, to memorialize the 8 victims of the collapse, but also remember that this had a great effect on survivors, both that were in the collapse, but also the community as a whole. So this is a space that works collaboratively or in tandem with this space over here, and you see this connection of the two, and they're both surrounded by a berm, so they're enclosed and sort of held tightly by that earthwork. And then we have that opportunity to have this reflective space over here, but in the Survivors Grove, but also a space that we envision the community coming together. So we suggest this idea of a community table or a harvest table. So a place for people to get together and socialize when we're able to do those sorts of things in our public spaces again. And really, you could imagine community events here. And it also, though, on a day-to-day basis, is a very serene place to be. We'll show some images in a few minutes of people sitting on berms and being able to just be in the park within this sort of enclosed and comfortable area. We also, in this concept, have that idea of a contemplative grove. This one a little bit larger, but part of this this memorial system or this memorial setup that is in this concept. And just briefly, I'll touch. We also have the idea of sensory play. In this case, it's a bit more of a linear condition. There could also be pieces out throughout this meadow landscape. Again, open play lawns and opportunity for winter ice here. And then again, marking the corners of the arena. In this one, just based on where they're located, we're suggesting that these could be plaques that are a little bit more subtle in the landscape, and as people move through and discover the landscape, they would also discover those. The last thing I'll touch on in this one in plan is that we imagine a sort of hierarchy of path systems or path materials. So this one coming across the site east to west, and then this one moving north to west, which connects the parking, we imagine could be concrete. And then we imagine these pathways here could be crushed stone or limestone screenings, just to give a bit of a different character. Limestone screenings or a crushed aggregate tends to slow people down as they move. And similarly, that could be a material that's used in these memorial spaces or the Survivors Grove and Memorial Garden. Again, just to slow people down, allow people to take in the space, and this really becomes a bit more of a contemplative type of space. And here we are again with a study model. So I think this starts to suggest that idea of the berm, fairly subtle elements, but really what we're hoping to achieve is to have that enclosed sort of environment. So embrace those spaces with these earth forms and provide a sheltered-like quality or a character of them being enclosed on either side or around the perimeter. And then when it does open up here, it opens up to this contemplative grove. So this edge you see is open, but we have that contemplative space on the other side. And then you see in close proximity this idea of the sensory play. And we think that's an important and an exciting kind of part of the project, in that in both projects we have memorial elements, but we think it's important that we also embrace the fact that this park should be for play. The arena, although there was a tragedy that befell the community within that space, there's also a lot of great memories that happened in the arena and since the collapse that happened in '59. So trying to honor and pay respect to that time, but also allowing the park to sort of memorialize the good that also happened. And then just a different view. You see this again, idea of the berm encircling the space. Here's our garden with the hockey stick sculpture rising out of it, and then from above here you see this contemplative grove. And a quick little schematic sketch of what that could be. Of course, if this was the sort of idea that we developed or that we went forward with, it would need to be developed in much more detail, and the scale of those sticks and the materiality and the garden that they sit in, all that stuff needs to be refined, but hopefully showing the intent of what this sort of sculptural memorial element could be. This set of images here is really suggesting what that berm condition can be around the Memorial Garden, around the Survivors Grove. So an opportunity, again, they serve a design purpose in that they give us that enclosure and help to create an appropriate scale within those spaces, but they also have this functional opportunity for people to lie on them. You could imagine kids running up them, rolling down the back side of them. And it is, as we suggested, we think it's important that we pull the memorial piece and the memorial idea into the park and let them exist together, so they're not a sort of off limits kind of space, but that they allow for people to socialize, gather, and have fun. And I think to us, to our mind, that's really a way of paying honor to the victims, especially given that 7 of them were kids. Within the Memorial Garden, we're suggesting that there's an opportunity for some stone wall, field stone wall, so pulling in the vernacular of the area, the context. You could imagine some of the bank barns in the area that may have a stone foundation. So just playing with some of the local materials. And then here's the idea down in the bottom of the harvest table or the community table. So a space for people to gather, and it can be quite large. And so you could have, even if people aren't acquainted, you could imagine that people could be at one end and others at the far end, and it still works as a functional seating area. The next slides I'm going to move through fairly quickly, but these will just start to give you an idea about some of the things that we are suggesting or could envision being successful in this sort of space. So here's some images that show that idea of sensory or natural play. You can see these sort of log steppers and the kids moving across these fallen trees within this within a more natural type of landscape. So there's educational opportunities as well, of course, but we can also introduce these constructed structures here, but using wood materials, and we've done these in a few parks and they're actually very successful. And again, given that we have just a couple hundred meters away what we'll call a typical play structure, we think this is a great opportunity for the community. Here's some images that show that idea of the contemplative space. So again, these are all in very urban areas, but we have the opportunity through tree planting, and again, you see some gravel surfaces, so that opportunity to slow movement a little bit. You can imagine the texture and the crunch underfoot, and these aren't spaces to be so active, so it's about sitting, and it's about a passive space, so we can create a really sheltered, serene kind of environment. And here we see some pictures of, I had mentioned the meadow landscape, and what we would typically do in this condition is create a mow strip, either by continuously mowing that meadow, or this could be planted with turf grass. But the meadow landscapes that you see here can be created by seed. The first couple of years, it's about maintaining the length of the meadow so that we keep out competing or weeds that want to compete. So they're cut fairly frequently, and then after that, once the meadow is established, then weed seeds have a hard time establishing themselves. So again, we get that aesthetic quality, but we also bring some ecological functioning to the site. And then in this slide, you of course see the idea of this winter ice. As I mentioned, it's not a refrigerated ice that we're suggesting, but a surface that is created by the community through flooding, through the detailed design of the project. We ensure that there's a hose bib, and then the community, the city, the municipality could provide a hose every winter. That is what happens in Guelph, and then the community is responsible for making the ice and upkeep it, which of course is with shovels. And then flooding as needed. Down, if you remember in the first concept, I had suggested the opportunity at that front entryway for market space or art in the park, and so this is just showing something indicative of that type of event. So that wraps up the presentation of the two concepts. I just want to briefly, before I finish here, go through the next steps. What's really critical for us now is that you provide some feedback. So where you are watching this video on Your Say North Perth, there's also an opportunity to link to a comment sheet or a survey sheet. So if you fill that out, that's going to give us really strong direction as we move forward. And then we're going to take those comments and review them and see what people like, see what people don't like, and that'll help us to develop a final concept. Once that final concept is developed, we will, along with that, produce a phasing plan and a cost estimate that we'll present to council for approval. And then, of course, prior to anything happening from a construction point of view, contract documents would need to be made. So drawings, blueprints, essentially, that would allow for contractors to bid on the project and then a selected contractor to construct the project. So again, most important for us now is for you to provide us feedback, things you like, things we may have missed. And it could be you like things from one concept that you'd like to see added to a second. Really important to understand that the process isn't that we select one concept here, but these are really to start initiating dialogue and discussion. So with that, I'd like to thank you for viewing the presentation. We're really excited to be involved with this. I wish we could meet in person, but this will have to do, so we'll make the best of it. And we look forward to developing a really exciting and important concept and project for you and the community. Thank you, and stay safe. Bye-bye.